It gives me great pleasure tonight to introduce our first speaker for tonight, Tom Thorfinnson, past Vice President of Rotary International and now Trustee-elect for Rotary Foundation. If I was to read out Tom's extensive biography that goes with him, you wouldn't have time to hear from Tom at all. It would be all just about me reading that out. It's quite impressive. It's most impressive. Tom's sort of theme is to roll up your sleeves and get things done approach to life. And he likes to be introduced in as shorter way as possible. Fellow Rotarians and distinguished guests, I give you Tom Thorfinnson.
Thank you. Well, good evening. Let's try it again. Good evening. Yeah, there we go. It's good to be here. I'm always worried when I'm introduced the way I was and they talk about me being a tremendous speaker. It kind of raises the expectations to a point where I don't feel you really understand my capabilities. So it's always good for me to talk about my first key speech as a Rotarian. I was an incoming governor for our district, and the district assembly is one of the more important events for the incoming governor to prepare for his or her year as a leader in the district. So we had an auditorium much like this, 250 people in the auditorium. In the back row were all the past governors for Rotary. And they have a tradition in our district of sitting in the back row and being very critical of the incoming governor and the speech. So it was a bothersome thing to prepare that speech, worried about what I should say and what I should focus on. So I spent quite a bit of time. And I decided the most important thing I could talk about is our effort to eradicate polio. So I wove it throughout my speech. I talked about the start of the program, how far we'd come, the number of cases of polio in the beginning, and where we were at that point. And then I ended the speech by urging the Rotarians in our district to continue our efforts to eradicate Rotary from the face of this earth. So now that I've realigned your expectations, we can kind of move forward and talk about the future of Rotary. I want to start by talking about the past. You know, in the beginning, there were these four guys that started Rotary, and you could see them there in the photo. And it would be interesting today if we could pick up our phones and text Paul Harris and just ask him a couple of quick questions. And I don't know what we'd get back, but it might be something like this. Interestingly enough, the first four Rotarians, one of them quit almost immediately. So retention has always been an issue in Rotary. When I joined Rotary, it was 1980. I'd come right outside of, or I just finished law school in Marquette Law School in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. And I, in those days, had pretty long hair. It was actually very curly, and it was a bit of an afro, to be honest. And I didn't think it was appropriate to have that as a young attorney joining my father's law firm, so I had cut my hair back. But my favorite group were the Stones. My dad welcomed me to the firm and told me that day, which was the day the Rotary Club met, that I needed to join Rotary, that it'd be good for business. So I walked into my first Rotary Club meeting, and the club was singing the song Daisy, Daisy. Not exactly something the Stones would sing. That song was actually written before Paul Harris started Rotary, so I wondered what I was doing there. When I joined, I'm not sure what the theme was, but I think it was something like embrace the 1950s. Much of Rotary in those days was my father's Rotary Club. It was a long meeting. There was a lot of socialization. We sang songs. We pledged our allegiance to the flag. We said a grace. We had a speaker that spoke for 30 minutes, and then we had a meal. I was practicing law, charging by the hour, and wondering how I was going to meet my billable hour requirements when we were taking close to 2 hours off for a lunch. That was the past. Now let's talk about the present. The numbers you see on the board are numbers that you commonly hear from senior leadership in Rotary when we talk about Rotary. We like to talk about the positives, and we like to talk about where we are. So here are the numbers. There's 1.2 million Rotarians in the world today. It's an amazing number when you consider it. We have 35,000 Rotary clubs, and 322 is the number of reported cases of polio last year. Now, when we started the program in 1989, there were over 350,000 cases a year of polio around the planet. So it's an amazing thing what we started and how far we've come. Of all the things at the international level we should be proud of, it's what we've done relative to the eradication of polio. In fact, right now, we're in the midst of seeing what is probably the first of the last 3 countries to be polio-free. We have not seen a reported case in Nigeria since August, which is pretty impressive. The next figure is $1 billion. Now, we don't have a real good handle on how much we spend in service, but we know what we're spending through the Rotary Foundation. And we estimate that about 2/3 of what every Rotary club does is local, and only 1/3 is international. And certainly that varies by club, but when you do the math like that, we are a $1 billion a year industry relative to service. It's an amazing figure. And the final one is what we have received in the last year from Bill Gates. He's pledged another $70 million this year, provided we get it matched. For every $1 we contribute, he'll double that with $2. So that's quite a commitment. That's $70 million added to what we've received so far from the Gates Foundation. Makes Rotary International the largest single recipient of gifts from the Gates Foundation. That's something to be proud of. Now here you see a few figures that we don't talk about as senior leaders in Rotary. Last year, membership worldwide dropped 0.8%. In North America, we're down 8.1% in the last 10 years. There's 8,000 new Rotary clubs that have been formed since I was governor in 1996. Now that may seem good, but we had 1.2 million Rotarians in 1996. So we have added 8,000 Rotary clubs and not increased our membership at all. I come from Minneapolis, Minnesota, and Minneapolis, Minnesota is known as kind of a trend-setting city from a retail perspective in the United States. It's headquarters for Best Buy and Target Corporation and a number of other retail entities. So we often hear on the radio and in the paper we see reported retail sales figures. And often when you hear retail sales figures, they will talk about same-store sales. Now, if you were to talk about same-store sales in Rotary today, it wouldn't necessarily be a good figure. We've had to add 8,000 new stores just to maintain our sales at the same level. The next figure, -10, is the average. That's what's happened in clubs across the world in the last 20 years in terms of average number of members. We've gone from 45 members per club down to 35 per club worldwide. And the final one applies to England. Rotary in England has 67% of its members now retired from work. Can we call ourselves a business organization when we've got that kind of percentage of retired individuals? Now, one of the things I've talked about today on a regular basis is looking at different business indicators. So often when we talk about a business, we talk about sales. We talk about gross sales, we talk about expenses, we talk about trends, but we don't talk about some of those hidden business indicators. And here's 4 on the screen that we need to start talking about in the context of our own Rotary clubs, and often in the context of our own businesses. If you want to know if your business can survive in a changing world, these are 4 things you have to analyze. Is your business flexible? And is your Rotary Club flexible? Are you more excited about the past or the future? Are we more excited about what we've done in eradicating polio as opposed to what's coming? What are we going to accomplish next? Do we spend more time on maintenance or strategy? If all we're doing is worrying about keeping things the way they've always been, it's not a good indicator of where we're going. And finally, is your club poised to discuss ideas? Are you welcoming and open to new and creative thoughts? If you aren't, chances of surviving in a changing world are not great. The parameters of change in Rotary are a challenge, but that doesn't mean there isn't opportunity. We have a set of rules. We have an institution that's well over 105 years of age, and oftentimes we're steeped in tradition that causes us to stop and question when change comes. But we also have an organization that has 35,000 different clubs. We're known for tremendous autonomy at the club level, which fosters creativity. It gives us an opportunity to experiment and try new things and see what works, and then learn from those other clubs where things are going well. I'm going to talk a little bit about the branding strategy for Rotary because it's pretty exciting stuff, what we're doing. About 4 years ago, I Googled Coca-Cola images. And the first few images that popped up, I put on this screen. And then a couple of minutes later, I Googled Rotary images. How did I do that? There we go. Now look at the contrast between these two screens. These are the first few images that popped up when I put Rotary images into my Google search. Look at the different colors. How many of those images do not even have a wheel? How many of them fail to communicate a crisp image of what we are in comparison to Coca-Cola? About 4 years ago when I was on the board, we started the process of initiating a rebranding of this organization. And it sounds kind of scary. There was a lot of people that thought we were going to destroy the image of Rotary, stop using the wheel, we'd change what we looked like or change the name. But that's not what branding's all about. Branding is the promise that you make. When you leave the room, the people that are left in the room, what they say about you is your brand. So if we were to walk out of this room and ask the non-Rotarians here, what's your image of Rotary? That's the brand that we've got, and that's what we need to work on. I was involved with a strategic planning committee for Rotary International. It's quite a challenge to sit on a committee that's trying to vision where we're going to be in 10 or 15 years, and then suggest or put forward a proposal to get us there. So I was on that committee and on the board, and I was one of the driving forces to move us forward relative to our new strategy and our new plan and our brand. We surveyed Rotarians around the world, 60,000 Rotarians. We surveyed young professionals, the kind of people we want to attract into Rotary. And what we found, number one, was that most people don't know who we are. And if they do, the image isn't necessarily positive. It's an image that I saw when I walked into my Rotary Club in 1980 as a new Rotarian. The average age of the Rotarians in my club at that time was somewhere between 83 and 104. All white hair, all male. Well, they weren't all white hair. There were some people with no hair. And I was wondering what I was doing in that room. When I was club president in 1992, we only did one new project that year. I made sure we installed portable defibrillators in the hall that we met in, So we started the year with the same number of Rotarians that we finished with, thanks to the defibrillators. As a result of the surveying, focus groups, the questions asked of young business leaders around the world, we discovered that there were 3 characteristics of our organization that were attractive to me, to you, and to future leaders. This is the essence of what our organization is. And the brand, the promise, is what you see on the screen right now. We encourage people to join leaders, exchange ideas, and take action. Now, I joined a club that was old, that was white, that was male. I came from a law school that was 50% female with the students. And I wondered what I was doing. But I will tell you, over the years, I learned to appreciate the Rotarians in that club and appreciate what we really are at our core. When we talk about the voice of Rotary moving forward, we're talking about 4 key characteristics. And here you see them on the screen. When you want to talk about where we're going, these are the key characteristics that we'd like you to use when you tell our story. Let me give you a couple of examples. SMART. Now, it's maybe not good. It's kind of egotistical to say that we're smart. But you can tell a story that tells someone that we really are smart. I just came from Uganda. I was there for 10 days at the end of February. We're involved in a $5.5 million water project in Uganda. It's pretty significant, to say the least. It's a district in the central area of Uganda, just north of the Nile. 400,000 people in this district. Now, a district in Uganda is like a state in the United States. There's 100 different districts, and we're taking on an entire district. The goal of Rotary, and the Rotarians in Uganda in particular, is to provide what's called universal coverage for all of that district. Safe water, good sanitation, hygiene practices in hygiene stations, hand-washing stations in every school, feminine hygiene education and protection for the girls in the classroom, because 1/4 of every one of the students, the girls, when they reach 7th grade, drop out of school. 1/4. And the reason is, more than likely, the lack of good sanitation facilities for those girls in terms of privacy. So we're taking this on. There's 800 villages, there's 134 schools, there's 23 health clinics, and we're going to provide safe water, sanitation facilities, bathrooms for all of those areas that don't have them. Now, we needed to do an assessment. Before we could start this, we needed to know how many villages had water and what was the distance to safe water. We needed to know what the schools had, how many students. Did they have safe water? Did they have a rain catchment system? Or did they have a borehole? And if they did, was it safe? It's a difficult task to gather that data, to do that needs assessment. And you know how we did it? Our first analysis was that it was going to cost about $25,000 to do that. Now, this is going to be a $5 million project, and you could say $25,000 is an adequate sum to spend on needs assessment. But before we started, we had a Rotarian active with the Rotaractors in Uganda. And he raised his hand and he said, I tell you what, why don't we have the Rotaractors help us? You know what we did? We rented motorcycles, and we had the Rotaractors go from village to village, school to school, clinic to clinic, and they gathered the data. And you know how they loaded the data? They used their smartphones, and it went up to the cloud. And I was sitting in Minneapolis on the 2 days that the Rotaractors were out in the field, and I was watching online instantaneous data being gathered by these Rotaract students. Now that's impressive. That's using the skills, the ideas, the talents of not just the Rotarians, but our partners, the Rotaractors. And that's what Rotary is all about. Caring is an obvious one. We all serve and we all love what we're doing, and we're doing it because we want to help those in need. But there's more to it than that. I walked into the Rotary Club in 1980 as the youngest member. I was the youngest member for 10 years. I had trouble connecting with those old-timers. When I became club president, it was 12 years later. And I still had a big disconnect with many of the members in that club. It was a 140-member strong club. And I hadn't connected with a lot of the old-timers. Partway through the year, in the middle of the winter, and I come from Minnesota, which is a very cold territory. You know, typical winter, we'll have a lot of days where it's well below Fahrenheit, below 0 Fahrenheit, which, you know, I think it's something like 16, 17 below Celsius. So it's darn cold. So about 2/3 of the way through the year, as club president, my wife and I decided to take a vacation. And I went to the club meeting on that Thursday noon, and I let them know that I wouldn't be there at the meeting the next week because we were heading down to Florida to take a week off. And we got up early the next morning. We started driving south because we didn't have enough money to afford to fly myself and my wife and our 2 daughters down to Florida. And we got up early and we started driving, and about 3.5 hours into the drive, I woke up, and that's not a big deal unless you're driving. And I found that our full-size van was going sideways down the freeway at 75 miles an hour. And I was looking across at my youngest daughter, Ashley, who was sitting in the front seat on the passenger side, and I was scared to death that she wasn't going to live through what was coming. But for the grace of God, we found ourselves in the ditch, and every window was popped out and shattered. And the roof of the van was a teepee. And we crawled out through what was the front window of the van. Not a scratch, not a broken bone. Now, we had another car, but for some reason, my wife and the kids wouldn't get in it with me and drive the rest of the way to Florida. So I found myself running the meeting the next week. And I did something I'd never done before in my life. I stood up in front of an audience and talked about a failure on my part. And it wasn't easy to do. And I explained the accident and what had happened. And one of the older members in the club was a funeral director. And he came up to me after the meeting with tears in his eyes, and I thought maybe it's because of the business that he'd lost. But he gave me a hug. And Ron said to me, Tom, he said, you don't know how much we would have missed you. Thank God you're okay. And that's what Rotarians are like. We don't just care for the people in need in our community. We care for each other. And when we lose a job, we pitch in and help someone find a job. And it's an amazing thing what you get out of Rotary. And that's a story that tells a characteristic of what Rotary really is at its heart and soul. And that's a story that tells our brand and communicates one key characteristic about our organization. And it doesn't matter where you are, whether you're in Nelson, New Zealand, or Eden Prairie, Minnesota, USA, our clubs all have that. So persistence I've already told you about because we've been doing polio since 1985. It was a regional campaign in the Philippines in 85. It became a global program of Rotary in 1989. It was my father's disease, not mine. And we may not finish it in the next couple of years, but we're going to finish it pretty soon. But we've gone through 2 full generations of fighting this disease, and we aren't going to give up until it's done. And that's what Rotary is, persistent. We stick with it, and we get it done. Inspiring, you've heard it. It's an amazing organization when we get it right. So people will ask me, what's it look like in the future? What's the next generation of Rotary going to look like? And I put the Rotary light symbol there because maybe the next generation of clubs will meet less frequently. Maybe it's once every 2 weeks. Maybe it's once a month. I don't know. I will tell you, we shouldn't be scared of it. As long as we protect those things that are important, which are the characteristics that I've already talked about. If we still have a club, even if it's meeting once a month, if it still cares, if it's still inspirational, if they're smart and they have impact, it's what we are and it's what we'll preserve and protect moving forward. Rotaract is down there because we may start asking the Rotaract clubs to turn into new generation Rotarians. Much of what we are is a club of people taking action, and Rotaract is capable of that. The vertical one on the other side is a model that's being discussed, and we may not see it, but imagine someone joining our organization because they believe in serving in the context of an area of focus. You talk about the water project in Uganda. What if somebody could click on a website and commit to $100 a year to help us in our cause to provide water for everyone in that district in Uganda? Would it be awful to label that person as a Rotarian? What if they joined in that context? They just plain and simply committed to contribute to a cause that they believed in. And then we reached out to them on a regular basis. We sent them an email to thank them. We let them know that if they're living in Nelson, New Zealand, there's Rotary clubs in your area. And if you want, you're welcome to join some of those people for a meal. And then maybe we reach out again and say, you know what, the Rotary Club of Nelson is picking up trash this weekend, or they're cleaning up the river and could use a hand. We could touch those people and keep touching them and keep them close. And maybe, just maybe, that vertical model fuels our existing models. There's nothing wrong with that. You know, when your product isn't doing well in a business, what do? You certainly want to improve the product, but you also look for other lines. Coca-Cola, when its Coca-Cola product wasn't selling quite so well, developed Coke Light, or Coke Zero, or Diet Coke. What needs to happen moving forward is to focus on the target. And the target is just a metaphor of the way we are in Rotary. At the core, at the center, is somebody like me, a zealot, somebody who bleeds Rotary. You don't want to be there. That's not normal, okay? But outside of me are the Rotarians at the club level who do amazing things, who are committed, who help carry the club. And just beyond that circle is another one of the rest of the members in that club. But that isn't the end of our target, because just outside of that are all of our friends and our family and Rotaract members and Interact and Youth Exchange and former Youth Exchange. All of the alumni, they're all out there. And you know what we haven't done a good job of is keeping those people close. We need to keep them close. We need to invest in the future. We need to keep forming Rotaract clubs. And then when they're done being a member of that club, we keep in touch. We keep their contact information. We keep inviting them. We keep thanking them. If I buy something in the U.S. from Amazon.com, they never let me go. They keep sending me emails. They say, you know what? You bought this, and other people that bought that same item looked at this, and they bought that. Would you be interested in these things? And we need to start thinking that way. It's not about getting people to join. It's about doing what we can to help in the world. And the more people we have close to us, the more we can accomplish. And who knows? Maybe 10 years from now, 15 years from now, so many of those people that we keep close will join. So I want to end by telling a story, because all I really am is a storyteller. I was asked about 5 years ago to write a short article for the magazine. It never made it to the magazine, but the request is to write about my best day in Rotary. And I've been blessed to serve at a pretty high level, so I've met all the presidents of Rotary in the last 20 years. I've sat down at dinner, I've had drinks with them, I've gone to projects, and that's an amazing thing in Rotary, to sit down with somebody that is that committed to serve in Rotary. But I got to tell you, though, none of those meals or trips or social hours with the presidents make my top list of the best day in Rotary. My best day was somewhere in 2003, I think it was. I was on my 5th or 6th trip to Haiti. I'd taken volunteers for years to that Caribbean country to help individuals see the need for safe water. And I'd gotten into a routine. We'd take 8 or 10 people, and basically we'd go there to do some hands-on work. But mainly I was getting them there to see how desperate that country was for our assistance. So on this trip in 2003, my 19-year-old daughter decided she wanted to go along with me. And so we had, I think, 7 or 8 of us that hopped in this vehicle. We flew in from Minneapolis to Miami to Port-au-Prince. We got there in time to attend the Rotary Club meeting of the Delmas Rotary Club that evening. And then early the next morning, we climbed into this vehicle. And this is part of the group. And I think there were 8 or 9 of us in this vehicle. Now, we were driving about 70 miles north, a little over 100 kilometers from Port-au-Prince towards the Central Plateau. And the roads there aren't very good, but they're pretty good in Port-au-Prince. So you start out at about 60 miles an hour, and about every 10 miles, your speed gets cut in half because the roads keep getting worse. So that's actually a math problem. So if anybody's a math major, I'd like you to figure out just how long it took us to get there with the speed getting cut in half every 10 miles. The bottom line is we'd left at 7 in the morning. We were supposed to be there at noon in a small town called Tomasik for a well dedication ceremony. So we got stuck in the mud when we tried to cross a river. There was no bridge, and the road had been washed out from the rain the night before, and we got stuck in the road. And shortly after that, the air conditioning in the vehicle also broke down. Now, we had 4 people in the back seat, and it's pretty crowded. We had given up from the start on avoiding touching the person next to us. And when the air conditioning stopped in 90-plus degree heat, we then gave up on the concept of not sweating on the person next to us. In any case, we got to the village where the well was at almost 2 o'clock. And they were waiting in a church for us because the first thing they wanted to do was have a service in the church before we cut the ribbon on the well. So we walked into this church, and it was full. Every seat was taken, and we kind of looked around, but of course they got up and gave us their seats. And I found myself seated directly behind my daughter. And my daughter's the gal in this photo with me, good-looking young gal. And she was sitting in a very short little chair because a young girl had given up her seat for my daughter. And that little girl was sitting on the floor in front of my daughter. And partway through this church service, they were thanking God and thanking Rotary for water. But this little girl kind of got my attention because she had gradually worked her way closer and closer to my daughter to the point where she got up the courage with one finger to reach over and touch my daughter's white skin. And she touched it and pulled her hand back and kind of giggled. And then my daughter did the same thing back to her and reached out and touched her skin and pulled it back and giggled. And the little 4 or 5-year-old girl just lit up. And it's an amazing thing as a parent to be there when that happens. And, the service was done. We got out. We cut the ribbon on the well. We pumped the water. We tasted the water. And then we got in the car and we went to 2 more villages that were potential sites to drill. And it was a long day. And we rolled into the town of Hinch at about 8 o'clock at night. And the Rotary Club was there waiting for us. We were supposed to be there at 6, but it was 8. And we walked into La Maguana restaurant for dinner. And we shared dinner with them. And then afterwards, they had a DJ who started playing some Caribbean music. And we started dancing. And there were members of both their club and our group, and we were having a lot of fun. We were drinking Prestige beer together. And after 3 or 4 songs, I found myself dancing with my daughter. And she said to me, "Dad, I never knew Rotary was like this." And I thought to myself, yeah, for a long time I didn't either. So let's dance. Please, let's dance. Thank you.